Hi and welcome to my channel, and welcome to an episode all about why I've still got my glasses on my head. No, about wide angle lenses. The one thing all of these cameras have got in common is that they are all fitted with wide angle lenses. In the case of this little Olympus OM2, it's a 28mm Zuiko. In the case of my Mamiya C330, it's a 55mm Sekor. And in the case of my 5x7 travel camera, it's a 150mm Fujinon. Now, for people used to smaller formats, 150mm might not seem like a wide angle, but it is. It's I think about equivalent to a 35 or 30mm. Anyway, this episode is largely brought about because I've seen quite a lot of wide angle photographs taken by quite a few reasonably experienced photographers that don't really work, and beginners seem to find wide angles a bit of a challenge. My approach has always been, I fell in love with wide angles the moment I got my first one, and I think that was when I had a Praktica Owl when I was about 16. And I got a 30mm Pentacon, and I love that lens and I used it all the time. And lots of people had telephotos because they kind of look flash, and I picked out bits of the scenery, but I liked what I count as the baked in drama that you get with a wide angle lens, because if you go up to an object, it absolutely looms out at you, and the drama of the whole scene, big foreground object or even a small foreground object but in close to it, provides an absolutely fantastic set of relationships between foreground and background, and makes things that are fairly ordinary quite dramatic. Now, I've used a wide range of wide angle lenses, wide range of wide angles, yeah. And some of my very favourites would be my 90mm Angulon that I use on my 5.4, the 55 that I use on the C330. I've taken a lot of pictures with these, and I'm going to go through some of my images and give you some ideas as to why I think they work, maybe what I could have done better. But to give you an idea of why I love wide angles and why I think maybe you should fall in love with them a bit too. Anyway, on to the pictures. On familiar territory for most people, which is 35mm and full frame sensor size prime wide angle lenses, and I'm particularly talking wide angle primes because I tend not these days particularly to shoot wide angle zooms or standard zooms, kit lenses. The reason being is intention with the photograph. I like to have the intention to shoot wide angle when I go out. Therefore, if I'm carrying a jack of all trades lens, the temptation is to use the zoom to frame rather than use the characteristics of the prime lens to create the photograph. I did a shoot last year at Mersey Island, and the only lens that I took for my Sony A7 mirrorless was a 24mm. And you can see it lends itself to that distant vanishing point colourful foreground approach. Another thing, of course, that's very useful is being able to give good weight to a foreground subject in comparison to the background. The couple in this shot are the subjects, but they're a very small part of the frame, but because of the viewpoint of a 24mm lens, they're given a lot of visual importance. The particular lens I'm using here is this Miranda 24mm f2.8, which I have to say is a bit of a little gem. I bought it for around £30 on eBay, and it's razor sharp and absolutely lovely and focuses down to a really, really close distance, so it's incredibly useful little lens. I use it all the time. Another great advantage, of course, with 35mm format prime wide angles is they tend to be quite compact, and often they'll have quite wide maximum apertures, so they're very, very handy to use. The compact size makes them actually very good for street photography as well, providing you don't mind getting close to people. On both of these last two shots, I used the technique of setting the lens to its hyperfocal distance, which is usually sort of about 3 or 4 meters, on about f11 or something similar, and there is really, with the 24mm lens, no need to focus at that point because the depth of field would be so huge that everything will be in focus, and I actually shot these without aiming from the hip. Right, let's move up in size now to 6x6cm medium format 120 roll film, and to perhaps one of my favourite lenses of all time. I've used it a lot in the past when I worked as a wedding photographer, and I just adore this lens. This is the 55mm Secor lens pair for the Mamiya C330. It is a beautiful lens, and it's just really easy to use. Let me show you some results from it. I think immediately you can see the drama that's introduced by the low viewpoint and the very wide angle 55mm Secor here. This is behind the O2 Arena in London Docklands. The figures are again a small part of the composition, but they're given a weight by the viewpoint of the lens and the angle of the lens. And I always think that the larger the negative size you go to, the more attractive wide angle shots appear, because there's so much more detail available and you can get drawn into the photograph. Because of 6x6cm square format, you get more angle of view in the vertical plane, and that really works very well if you have dramatic skies, as I was lucky enough to have for this shot. And I absolutely adore the square 6x6 format for urban landscapes, particularly ones where you can contrast skyscrapers and dark and brooding skies. Again, another plus point is being able to stop down and get loads of depth of field, so you can have sharpness in the foreground as well as the background, and that becomes more and more important the bigger the format gets. Okay, moving along to large format now, and another one of my all-time favourite lenses, the Schneider Kreuznach 90mm f6.8. It's an absolutely gorgeous little lens, super sharp, and one of the cheapest large format lenses on the market. I've seen ones around for just over £100, and they are really nice. This actually was the first shot I ever took on 5.4, and you can see here I picked up some nice foreground interest. I'd been back over a few days with various other cameras that I had, and finally got to take the 5.4 down and get this. And it's a good illustrator of the fact that a shot can be very, very ordinary if you don't have something interesting in the foreground. The parched, cracked earth and the fallen beams in the foreground of this shot really add to the feeling of loneliness and maybe otherworldliness about it. And that wouldn't be so easy to get with a standard lens with a narrower viewpoint. As with most of the other pictures taken on my 90mm Angulon, I shot this one stopped down to minimum aperture of f32 for front to back sharpness, and then just adjusted exposure with the shutter speed. A couple of weeks ago I took my 5x4 MPP and the 90mm lens out to a fantastic location in Suffolk called Pin Mill. It's somewhat famous for the number of wrecked small boats that it has on its river foreshores there, and I spent a happy couple of hours going around and photographing those, all with the 90mm lens. I think these shots illustrate particularly well how you can have texture in the foreground and relate it into the environment that your subject's in this case the river and the big sky of the Suffolk coastline. The village of Pin Mill was actually featured in a movie in the 1950s, a fairly low budget one called Halfpenny Breeze, but it's worth a watch if you get a chance to. I actually picked up a copy of it because I'm a little in love with the place now. I've popped up a couple of images from the largest format I use, which is 5x7, but I haven't actually managed to have the opportunity to take the 5.7 camera out and use it as the weather has been pretty foul, typical British summer, but there'll be more coming up from that very soon. So, as a sort of sum up to all of this, some of the points that make wide angles particularly useful. In full frame 35mm guys, wide angle lenses are often lighter, shorter, more portable, and generally less obtrusive than a bigger lens stuck on the front of your camera. They're able to give weight and importance to the foreground while still keeping it in relation to the background, while still keeping the picture harmonious. All in all, they allow storytelling like practically no other lens can. The way you can relate one part of the scene to the other is just completely unique with a wide angle lens. I think with some of the obsession we have nowadays with out of focus backgrounds and swirly bokeh, that the poor old wide angle lens gets a little bit forgotten in favour perhaps of the short telephotos and perhaps what we might call the more art lenses. But I absolutely love a wide angle. Well, I hope you enjoyed your look at some of my wide angle images and some of my thoughts on using wide angles in general. I love them, and I hope some of that love has worn off on you guys. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this, well, perhaps you'll give it a like. It really helps the channel. And you know, if you liked it a lot, maybe you'd like to subscribe. I'm getting close to that magical 100, and it's taken quite a long time to get there, but onwards and upwards. Anyway, I hope to catch you very soon, and you take care. Bye.